Sup, chooms? How you all living? I hope everything is alright and you all are having a great week. So, you chooms know, who have followed me for a long time, that I usually concentrate on scientific content in this channel, and I don't usually engage in just throwing out my opinions, at least not without giving some scientific backing. First, because I'm not arrogant enough to think that thousands of people are interested in listening to me just ramble about some random things. But it's almost the end of the year now, so I thought I would make an exception for just once. Something interesting has been happening recently. I have been getting asked on a regular basis my opinions about this dude named Clavicular, as well as my opinions about the looks maxing community. In general, that's a tough question for me to answer, Chooms, because outside of my own channel, I barely consume any social media by choice. But even as someone who limits his time on the internet, I still know about Clavicular. That's because his popularity has been exploding recently. So much so that to the point where he's getting mainstream coverage, and many prominent influencers have been making videos about him. Most of the content I've seen made about him have been pieces attacking his character, which I think is pretty especially because these attacks really started becoming prominent after Clavicular had his YouTube channel banned. No matter what your opinion is about someone, I think it is cowardly to kick someone when he's down. So even though I have my disagreements with Clavicular, I'm definitely not going to make this yet another shitty attack video amongst the dozens already out there against him. Truth be told, I actually overall kind of like Clavicular. I know he's a prominent figure in the looks maxing community, which initially was a big red flag to me because I know the looks maxing crowd comes from some of the most toxic sewers on the internet. So, despite my qualms with the look maxing community, I still agree with the fundamentals behind looks maxing. Hell, I even made a video several years ago about why going bald can ruin your life. So I don't fault men for putting a big emphasis on their physical appearance. It's obvious something of a great matter of importance to a lot of men these days. But a big problem with the looks maxing community is that they often the advice they give paradoxical to the goals. Most notably, many of them promote ideas that are counterproductive towards looks maxing. Many of them are against finasteride. They are anti-sunscreen. They promote the carnivore diet. So when I saw Clavicular's content for the first time, it was like a breath of fresh air to me because he wasn't afraid to take a strong stance against popular but misguided opinions amongst looks maxers, like the ones I'm already mentioned. You see, the looks maxing community has basically been so absorbed by the online manosphere that these two communities have become almost indistinguishable. This is extremely detriment, although, because many of the things that the online manosphere will often promote will achieve the opposite of what the looks maxing or the looks maxing sphere on the internet is trying to acquire. For example, like I said, many of them are against finasteride strongly, so which is hilariously stupid because saving your hair by taking an 5 alpha reductase drug like finasteride or dutasteride is the single most effective thing, not to mention the easiest thing you can do to preserve and enhance your looks. Yet despite the great benefits of the drug, the looks maxing community is willing to betray their own principles on this because they don't have the balls to do what they have to do to save their own hair. They'll try to claim it is about preserving their masculinity since they don't want to suppress their DHT, but this is just so something they cope with their decisions not to take finasteride. The real truth, and the one they'll never admit to anyone, is that the reason why they don't take finasteride is because they are too afraid to do so. They're afraid of the drug, and therefore they have to tell themselves that DHT is crucial for their masculinity in order to rationalize their fear of the drug, even though there is no evidence DHT is important in adulthood. So, Luxmaxer will actually acknowledge the importance of hair, and they're right about that. But at the same time, they'll try to scare people away from the one treatment that we know for certain works and is backed by substantial clinical evidence, and instead they'll try to convince themselves and others that they can stop their hair loss with these ridiculous natural therapies like scalp massages and smearing eggs and lard all over their scalp. They'll always try to insist that it works by showing some examples to influencers who have allegedly tried these methods successfully. But there's a big problem when relying on anecdotes like this. The big problem with this is that there's no way to verify if these anecdotes are actually accurate. For all we know, these people claiming miraculous results from just natural therapies are just experiencing a placebo effect, or maybe their hair growth could be from other causes. Or more likely, they are just grifters who are actually on finasteride but claiming some natural protocol is what's actually responsible for the result as well. This isn't too unfathomable to think about, Jones, since many of these influencers are financially motivated and many of them make over $10,000 per month off communities like school, where they peddle their of this protocol for a fee to prove works is measure it against some of type of control, which is why you need studies that include a placebo control group. Of course, that's the last thing these snake oil salesmen want to try to do. So they'll tell everyone that science is woke and corrupted by big pharma influence, which is pretty ironic considering that astronomical profit margins that these peddlers of natural treatment make in annually. It's crazy to me how Lux Maxes will promote plastic surgical procedures like limb lengthening surgeries and facial reconstruction surgeries that carry some of serious medical risk, but at the same time they're too afraid to take a drug like finasteride, which is a drug that has a well established safety margin, which is prescribed to millions of people across the world every single year. And that drug, which they despise, can do more to improve their looks than any surgery or any exercise routine they can do at the gym. The looks maxing community should be on their hands and knees thanking Big Pharma for having invented such a wonderful drug rather than spreading fear mongering and conspiracy theories about it. The looks maxing community also heavily promotes the carnivore diet, even though fruits and vegetables contain phytochemicals that promote skin health and improve collagen production, while diets that are high in red meat are high in advanced glycation and end products, which promote premature aging and development of many diseases, as opposed to diets high in vegetables which are low in AGEs. Additionally, a zero carb diet is extremely detrimental to a gym performance, since carbohydrates are the only fuel source that can be stored directly into the skeletal muscle tissues as muscle glycogen. So, therefore, it is more readily available for the intense anaerobic activities like strength training, and it generates ATP, adenosine triphosphate, at much faster rate than burning fat. Now, I know that carnivore kids will bring up biochemical processes like the Randall cycle and glyconeogenesis in order to sound smarter than they really are. And yes, I know it's possible for your body to become more fat adapted and to create glucose in the liver via gluconeogenesis. The problem, though, with relying on that is that gluconeogenesis requires protein. So, if you're converting protein into glucose, that means you are going to have less protein overall, which is an obvious problem if you are interested in building muscle, since protein is a very important source for the repair and resynthesis of skeletal muscle tissues. This isn't just some theoretical mechanical data I'm talking about. No, that's the carnivore carb relies on. What we have studies that compare how athletes perform in certain diets. For example, this randomized control crossover country compared exercises performance on a low carb ketogenic diet versus a high carb diet. The results show that both strength performance and aerobic performance were improved markedly on the high carb diet compared to the low carb ketogenic diet. And this was just after 4 days of each diet. And I should remind you that this was a keto diet we are talking about, not a carnivore diet. The keto diet still had some carbohydrates in them, since at least keto dieters aren't stupid enough to think that vegetables are bad for you. A carnivore diet, on the other hand, has essentially zero carbohydrates. I know some of them drink milk and even eat honey, so many of them do eat some carbohydrates, but the real carnivore purists forsake all carbohydrates completely, and they like to perform even worse than the athletes in this study. That's why almost nobody on the carnivore diet is strong. There are pretty much no proof professional athlete bodybuilders on the carnivore diet. The only carnivore dieters I can think of is actually legitimately strong men like Sean Baker, but he's someone who has been training for many decades and he likely built his strength foundation on a diet that included carbohydrates initially. At least I'm sure someone would probably cherry pick a few more examples that I'm not aware of, but I could also show you examples of strong and athletic vegans, so that doesn't really make a proof a point. Most carnivore dieters look like absolute shit. Their skin is almost always red and bloated, like they are alcoholics. Usually, when you see carnivore influencers show examples of attractive people following their lifestyle, like you see amongst the primal crowd, they'll show pictures of videos of young people. That does not matter in the slightest, though. Like when I was young man back in college, I knew women who would smoke, drink every day, and some who would even use hard drugs on a regular basis, and they were still hot. All these videos and pictures we see online aren't trustworthy, especially since we know some carnivore influencers like Michelle Peterson has spent tens of thousands of dollars in plastic surgery for her face, and some other influencers like Steak and Butter Gal have been busted for using beauty filters in their videos. The fact is that all these Gen Z kids who proudly spend all day in the sun without sunscreen and avoid vegetables and eat all meat diet are going to have skin looks like broken glass by the time they're my age. Don't believe me? Here's an example of a woman who is on the carnivore diet who actually is about my age. Now I'm sure most some people can cherry pick some exceptions, but the bottom line is that if you want to look good and make gains in the gym, you need to be able to do a lot of work, and carbohydrates are a much better fuel source for high intensity anaerobic and aerobic activity than fats and proteins. Clavicular actually talked about this in his video on the carnivore diet, which is why I thought his content was so refreshing to hear, especially since it seems like 99% or so of Luke's maxers don't really care about it.